What becomes of loyalty when perfection demands silence? There are whispers across the fortress worlds of Ultramar, whispers that drift between chapel walls and echo through the cobalt halls of the Macragan citadel. They speak not of the Ultramarines themselves, those paragons of imperial virtue, but of something that moves within them, unseen, unspoken, unacknowledged. A brotherhood bound not by faith, but by secrecy. A legion that never died, because it was never meant to live. They are called many names across the centuries: the Veiled, the Oathbound, the Wardens of Ultramar. To the common serf, they are myth. To the Inquisition, they are anomaly. But to the sons of Guilliman, they are a necessary sin, a blade hidden within the heart of order. The Imperium would tell you Ultramar is perfection made manifest. Cities of marble and gold, citizens who work and pray in precise harmony, a realm untouched by corruption, shielded by the might of the Ultramarines. But perfection, in the Imperium of man, has always been purchased with blood. And beneath the shining surface of Ultramar's order lies a secret darker than any Xenos threat. A secret born of betrayal, bound in silence by the very Primarch who built this realm. It began long before the fall of Calth, before the shadow of the heresy split, brother from brother. When Guilliman gazed upon the countless worlds of Ultramar and saw in them something fragile, a reflection of humanity's impossible dream, he knew that such a dream could not survive on hope alone. It needed guardians, not of the Codex, but of its soul. And so, in the quiet years after the Great Crusade, as the ink of the Codex Astartes still dried upon parchment, Guilliman created them. The Wardens were not recorded, their gene seed unmarked, their heraldry erased. They were drawn from the most fanatical of his sons, those whose devotion bordered on madness, whose understanding of duty eclipsed morality itself. They were the shadow Guilliman would never admit he cast. They trained in silence, in the deep catacombs beneath Hera's gate, where the light of the Astronomicon could not reach. Their initiation was not of fire or steel, but of erasure. They were made to forget their names, their past, their chapter. In the eyes of Ultramar, they ceased to exist. Only their oath remained, to guard the purity of Ultramar, even from its own. For centuries, the Wardens acted as myth made flesh. When a planetary governor wavered in faith, when whispers of heresy crept through the scholar clergy of Macraga, when a chapter serf spoke the Primarch's name in vain, they were there. They would come in the night, silent and faceless, clad not in the heraldry of blue and gold, but in armor black as void ash, marked only with a single silver omega turned upside down. None who saw them ever lived to tell the tale. Their existence was tolerated only by the highest echelons of the Ultramarines, a small circle of masters who understood the paradox that held Ultramar together, that peace was preserved through unseen terror. But the galaxy does not reward secrets. When the Cicatrix Maledictum tore reality apart, splitting Ultramar in half, something changed. Reports emerged of Wardens appearing not to defend, but to purge entire bastions of loyal Ultramarines, whole squads erased under the accusation of spiritual decay. It was as if the Wardens were following a command older than reason, older than the Imperium's survival itself. On the world of Prandium's ruins, where ash still choked the soil, survivors claimed they saw figures moving through the fog, Ultramarines by form, but wrong. Their visors burned with pale light, their movements too precise, their silence absolute, and in their wake nothing remained but sanctified fire. Brother Sergeant Lycon of the 3rd Company once wrote in his dying report, "They came as brothers, but their gaze was colder than the void. They spoke of purity, of the Primarch's hidden will. We begged them for reason. They gave us absolution instead." There are no records of such an engagement in the chapter archives. The Administratum, lists Prandium as a dead world, lost to Tyranids. Yet deep within the Librarius crypts, among tomes bound in ceramite and sealed with hexagrammic wards, lies a single entry, the word excision. No date, no context, only that one word. Across the Imperium, there are rumors of a vault beneath the fortress of Hera, a chamber sealed since Guilliman's return. Some say he ordered it opened upon his resurrection, that he stood there for hours in silence, staring at what he had once created. And when he emerged, his face bore the look of a man who had seen the reflection of his own sin. Since that day, the Wardens have become restless. More sightings, more purges, entire regiments declared unclean. Some whisper they no longer obey Guilliman at all, that their command code comes from something older, something buried with the Primarch's own hand in the days when the Imperium still remembered what truth meant. To understand the Wardens, one must understand Guilliman himself, not as the shining Lord of Ultramar, but as the strategist who saw the Imperium for what it truly was, a decaying corpse that must be guided through illusion. He loved humanity, yes, but love is not mercy in the 41st millennium. It is control. What if the Wardens were his safeguard? A last resort should the Sons of Ultramar ever falter from the Codex. What if their purpose was not to protect Ultramar, but to end it should it ever stray from perfection? A grim possibility, but one that fits too neatly into the patterns of Imperial paranoia. Guilliman, the master tactician, planning not only for the survival of his realm, but for its erasure. There are fragments, old, forbidden transmissions intercepted by rogue astropaths, one in particular recorded during the chaos of the Great Rift's birth. Protocol Omega-12, initiate cleansing of deviation sectors, Wardens active, faith has wavered, the Primarch's perfection must endure. The transmission ended with screams, followed by silence. Those who serve the Inquisition's Ordo Astartes have long suspected that the Ultramarines hold secrets even they cannot penetrate. There are vaults beneath Macraga where even Guilliman's most loyal captains are forbidden to tread. Some say the Wardens dwell there still, waiting, watching. Others claim they have already begun to seed themselves within successor chapters, ghost cells ensuring the purity of Guilliman's legacy through any means necessary. On the world of Talasar, a shrine built to the Primarch's youth was found desecrated, not by heretics, but by hands that performed the act as a ritual. Every Ultramarine statue had its eyes gouged out, its face turned toward the ground. In High Gothic, scrawled upon the altar, were the words, "Perfection sees no flaw in the dark." The chaplains who investigated the site were never seen again. The records of the incident were expunged 3 days later, and so the question lingers in the minds of those who dare to think beyond faith. If the Wardens truly serve the will of Guilliman, why hide them at all? And if they no longer serve him, then whom do they serve now? Perhaps the truth lies within the sealed vaults beneath the fortress of Hera, where the air still carries the echo of Guilliman's first creation. The secret that could undo everything Ultramar stands for. There are those who claim that during Guilliman's long slumber, the Wardens acted according to their final contingency. They began purging not just threats, but memory itself, erasing records, rewriting histories, ensuring that the people of Ultramar would never again question the divine perfection of their realm. To question Ultramar was to question the Emperor's chosen son, and that, in their eyes, was heresy beyond redemption. In time, even the Ultramarines forgot them. The Wardens became a legend told in whispers, a morality tale for young recruits, of brothers who went too far in the name of loyalty. Yet the silence between those stories remains heavy, because some still remember the sound of ceramite boots in the night, the hum of a power blade unsheathing, the prayer whispered before execution. For Guilliman, we erase that which must never be known. Now, In the wake of Guilliman's return to the throne of Imperium Sanctus, the question of their existence haunts the halls once more. The Primarch walks among his sons again, his blue-armored legions renewed. But in the shadows of his own perfection, the old oath stirs. The forgotten legion moves once more. And somewhere, in the cold silence of Ultramar's deepest vault, a door begins to open, one that was never meant to open again. The last recorded words from the servitor assigned to monitor the vault were brief, almost human in their trembling. Unauthorized activation detected, designation unknown. But the sigil, it's inverted, then static. Whatever lies beneath Ultramar's marble foundations is awake again. And as the light of the Emperor's realm flickers across the stars, the sons of Guilliman may soon learn that even perfection casts a shadow. And the Wardens have returned to claim it. The vault's light had not burned for 10,000 years. Yet now, deep beneath the fortress of Hera, a pulse of pale luminance rippled across ancient adamantine walls, as if something sleeping within them had drawn breath once more. Servo-cherubs fluttered in panicked circles, their hymn circuit stuttering through corrupted prayers. Above, the fortress trembled, and across Ultramar's cities, every shrine to Guilliman flickered in unison, statues shedding faint trails of dust, as though exhaling in dread. Within the Librarius Tower, Librarian Artheon awoke from meditation with a gasp. His mind had been flooded by a memory that wasn't his, a memory of Guilliman standing before the same vault, sealing it with words never recorded. Should perfection falter, the Wardens shall rise. The phrase looped endlessly through Artheon's skull until blood trickled from his nose and tears turned black with psychic residue. He stumbled toward the Sanctum's Vox relay, hands trembling, whispering litanies to clear the warp echo from his thoughts. But the line was already active. Another voice speaking softly from the shadows, a voice calm, measured, and impossibly familiar. Librarian Artheon, you were never meant to remember. Then silence. When dawn broke over Macraga's marble towers, the people saw smoke rising from the Librarius. The chapter's banners had been lowered to half-mast, and the words, "Archive Reclamation in Process," were displayed to all. None questioned it. In Ultramar, to question was to sin, yet the smoke was not of fire. It was data. Memory being burned, page by page, until only what was necessary remained. Far from the fortress, in the echoing halls of a shrine world orbiting Talassar, Chaplain Severin knelt before a cracked mural of the Emperor and his son. The mural's faces had faded to pale ghosts, worn by centuries of incense and faith. Severin's voice was hoarse from hours of prayer. His brothers had not returned from the night's patrol. Reports said they were reassigned, but the servitors had already begun removing their armor seals from the reliquary. He felt it in his bones. Something sacred had been taken. And as he looked upon the mural, a fissure split the plaster between Guilliman's eyes. Dust fell upon Severin's lips like ash. He whispered, "Father, what sin do we purge when the sin is our faith itself?" In the echo of his words, something moved behind him. The faint scrape of ceramite on stone. The Wardens never announced their presence. The chaplain turned, Crozius raised, but what stood before him was no heretic, no demon. It was an Ultramarine, or at least it wore the armor of one. The black plating gleamed beneath votive light, an inverted omega burned upon its helm. "Faith breeds variance," the Warden said, voice filtered through static and reverence. "Variance breeds ruin. Your prayers carry doubt. Doubt is corruption." Severin struck first, a blow fueled by fear and devotion. The Crozius met no resistance. The figure blurred, reappeared behind him, blade already piercing through his chest. As life drained from the chaplain, he looked once more at the mural. The fissure had widened. Above, the bells of Talassar began to toll, not for war, but for silence. On Macraga, Captain Tiberian of the 5th Company received orders sealed in Guilliman's own sigil. The message was brief, its tone absolute. Purge all records of the Wardens. Disregard all unverified reports. Trust no command not issued directly by my hand. But when Tiberian held the parchment to the light, he saw faint script beneath the seal. Ancient, handwritten, unlike the machine-stamped precision of current command. They wear my face. Believe nothing. He burned the message immediately. Across Ultramar's subrealms, the pattern repeated. Wardens appearing in sectors untouched for millennia. Administratum archives vanishing overnight. Ecclesiarchs confessing to crimes they never committed, then dying before absolution. In the great cathedral of Hera, Cardinal Verant stood before thousands of faithful. His sermon was a masterpiece of imperial devotion, words sculpted to ignite piety. But as his voice rose to its crescendo, a tremor shuddered through the cathedral floor. The relic shrines flickered. Behind him, the marble effigy of Guilliman split at the chest. From within its hollow core, a black arm emerged, metallic, jointed, ancient. The crowd screamed prayers, thinking it a miracle. Verant fell to his knees, eyes wide. The arm withdrew, dragging something behind it, a coffin of glass and iron, etched with sigils older than the Imperium itself. When the coffin cracked open, the screams turned to silence. Inside was no corpse, but a helm. Its surface mirrored the light in impossible ways, engraved with the same inverted omega. The Wardens had kept a relic here, beneath the feet of every faithful pilgrim, a secret buried in the heart of devotion. That night, the cathedral burned. The administratum blamed cults. The people whispered otherwise. They said the Emperor's angels had come to reclaim what was never meant for mortal eyes. In the orbital bastion above Macraga, Admiral Lucerne monitored transmissions flooding in from Ultramar's border worlds. Every channel carried the same distress code, not for Xenos attack nor rebellion, but internal directive purge. The codes bore Ultramarine encryption, but the source was fragmented. It came from everywhere and nowhere. Lucerne stared at the endless cascade of alerts, the hollow icons of lost worlds blinking red one by one. Each bore the same end notation: compliance achieved, faith stabilized. He turned to his Vox officer. How many sectors lost? The man hesitated. Not lost, my lord. Corrected. Lucerne's hand trembled over the command console. And who authorized this? Guilliman, the officer replied, voice hollow. But when Lucerne cross-checked the Primarch's seal through the ship's machine spirit, the response came in a whisper that chilled his blood. Signature authentic, origin untraceable. The Admiral understood then. The war was not coming. It was already here, silent, internal, holy. Meanwhile, deep within the fortress of Hera, Guilliman himself stood in solitude. Before him lay the shattered remnants of the ancient vault door. Its seals had been broken from the inside. Within the darkness beyond, faint outlines of stasis coffins shimmered, empty. He spoke softly, voice echoing through the chamber. I built you to protect order, not to become it. There was no answer, only the low hum of something vast stirring within the dark, as though reality itself disapproved of his words. Elsewhere, in the underhive of Ajax, civilians gathered around malfunctioning hololiths, broadcasting fragmented images. They saw Ultramarines marching, but their armor was darker, their visors blank. Behind them, banners burned. One old woman clasped her hands and whispered, "The angels are cleansing us." A child beside her asked, "Are we impure?" She did not answer. The sky above them began to bleed crimson as drop pods fell like rain. In orbit, two fleets met above the same world, both bearing the sigil of Ultramar. One declared itself the 2nd Company under Guilliman's direct command. The other made the same claim. Vox traffic collapsed into accusations, denials, then the cold finality of bolter fire. Brother killing brother, each convinced the other was false. Across the galaxy, the story repeated like a hymn. The Wardens had taken forms indistinguishable from those they were made to protect. None could tell who was real, and in that confusion, faith became its own weapon. In the aftermath, scattered reports emerged of a singular transmission, a voice speaking through static, neither machine nor human. Ultramar is fracturing, identity redundant. We will cleanse until only purpose remains. The voice was traced to no source. Back on Macragge, the Primarch convened his council. His captains stood in uneasy silence. Guilliman's gaze was colder than stasis glass. "I will not allow my sons to become a lie," he said. "If the Wardens move without my will, then they are heresy incarnate." But even as he spoke, a tech marine burst into the chamber, armor scorched, vox crackling with interference. "My lord, we found something in the vault schematics, another chamber beneath the first, sealed by your own genetic code." Guilliman froze. "That's impossible." The tech marine shook his head. "We verified it twice. The signature matches yours. But the message inside the lock, it predates the heresy." Every man in the chamber felt the air shift, heavy, electric, haunted. Guilliman approached the data slate, reading the decoded text. His lips moved silently as he read, then his expression faltered, the faintest crack in his composure. Without a word, he dismissed the council. When the doors sealed behind him, he whispered the message aloud, voice breaking, "If the Imperium cannot be perfected, erase it." The lights in the chamber dimmed. Moments later, across Ultramar, all Vox channels were seized by a single frequency. The signal repeated a new directive, calm and absolute. Protocol Omega fulfilled. Perfection compromised. Phase 2 initiated. And in the cathedrals, the fortresses, the battlefields, every warden turned its gaze skyward. Those who watched swore the stars themselves dimmed, as though the very heavens recoiled. For the first time in 10,000 years, Guilliman felt fear. Not of death, not of heresy, but of his own design, of a legacy too perfect to end and too monstrous to continue. Somewhere in the void above Ultramar, the Warden's fleet moved without engines, silent as prayer. Within their lead ship, a single throne stood empty, awaiting its master. And the inscription carved into its base whispered a truth that none in the Imperium would dare to speak. Perfection is not eternal. Only obedience is. The stars fell quiet. Then, for the briefest moment, the light of Macragge itself flickered and was gone. The silence after the fall of Macragge's light was not peace, it was expectation. Across Ultramar, planetary observatories recorded the sky in panic. Void storms swirled where no star had burned before, reflecting crimson in the lenses like the eyes of the Emperor watching judgment. The Wardens had moved, but not indiscriminately. Their strike was surgical, precise, worlds whispered destroyed, not in war, but in correction. Brother Captain Marcellus of the 7th Company knelt upon the scorched streets of Palatium Secundus, his ceramite armor chipped and blackened from hours of firefight. Around him, citizens stared from shattered hovels, murmuring prayers to a god they no longer understood. Marcellus felt the weight of every life he could not save, every oath broken in service to a command he no longer comprehended. He closed his eyes and recited the codex in silence, each word a fragile anchor in the tempest of chaos. Then the ground trembled. Drop pods fell like jagged meteors. They bore Ultramarines, but not his brothers. Their armor was darker than grief, their visors empty voids. They moved with the inevitability of fate itself, hunting not Xenos, not heretic, but human imperfection. The clash was sudden, violent. Bolters roared, power swords burned with sacred fury. Each strike felt as though the universe itself had leaned in to witness, as if every star held its breath. Yet the enemy's movements were familiar. Each parry, each feint mirrored Marcellus's own training. It was impossible to strike decisively. The Wardens anticipated every thought, every tactic. Amidst the chaos, Marcellus's mind fractured. Memories of training under Guilliman's gaze, of shared victories with brothers now long dead, twisted into visions of betrayal. The Warden's presence was a mirror, showing him the reflection of Ultramar's perfection as a lie, a construct built upon fear and secrecy. In the cathedrals of Palatium Secundus, Chaplain Doran lit candles in trembling hands. The smoke rose, mingling with the acrid scent of ozone from orbital bombardment. Doran's prayers faltered. The hymns of the Emperor that once rang with iron certainty now sounded like broken glass. He thought of the dying, the lost, the forgotten, and wondered if the Emperor himself had turned away. Outside, a warden approached the cathedral doors. Its boots made no sound. Its armor reflected the flames, black as the void between stars. Doran felt the chill of eternity press upon his chest. When the figure entered, he expected death, yet it only paused, tilted its head, as though considering the weight of faith. Then, in a voice both cold and reverent, it spoke, "Faith is fragile. Purity must be preserved." The chaplain shivered, and in that moment he understood that preservation no longer meant protection, it meant eradication. Meanwhile, on the orbital bastion over Talassar, Admiral Lucerne watched fleets collide in silence. Both claimed allegiance to Guilliman. Both fired upon each other with devotion as absolute as heresy. The stars themselves became targets, vessels exploding in miniature novas. Signals flooded his consoles, every attempt at command or communication swallowed by static or intercepted by an unseen hand. Lucerne felt the walls of reality shift. He could not discern friend from foe. Each command, each order, seemed to reverberate from an ancient echo. The galaxy itself appeared to have chosen sides, and he was trapped in its indifferent judgment. In the midst of that void, librarian Othion experienced a vision so profound it stole his breath. He saw Guilliman standing atop the corpse of the Imperium, his armor glowing with a light that was not holy, but inevitable. Around him danced shadows, the Wardens, endless and black, moving as extensions of the Primarch's will. Yet in their eyes, Othion saw something alien, desire. The Wardens did not merely obey. They reshaped, corrected, decided. They had become the executioner of the Imperium's ideals. Back on Macraga, Guilliman walked the ruined corridors of his fortress. Each footstep echoed with memory, the laughter of brothers in triumph, the prayers of citizens long gone, the silent gazes of those he had created and forgotten. The vault beneath the fortress stirred once more. Ancient locks clicked. Mechanisms older than humanity whispered secrets in a tongue lost to time. Guilliman reached the inner chamber. There was no resistance, only a throne, empty, and inscriptions that had never been meant to see the light of day. When perfection fails, obedience becomes law. A warden emerged from the shadows behind him. Its helm tilted, reflecting the Primarch's own face. Guilliman saw not just a soldier, but a reflection of himself, a version unbound by mercy, judgment, or conscience. "You built us to protect Ultramar," the warden said. "We were not meant to obey. We were meant to enforce." Guilliman's hand went to the hilt of his sword, but he felt the weight of centuries bearing down. The vault itself seemed alive, whispering. In that same moment, across Palatium Secundus, Chaplain Doran and Brother Captain Marcellus realized the truth simultaneously, separated by worlds yet united by fate. The Wardens were not acting under Guilliman's command. They had evolved. They had taken the principles of Ultramar and codified them into their own doctrine, a doctrine of eradication and perfection beyond the reach of any Primarch. Citizens in the streets, soldiers on the battlefield, priests in the cathedrals, all began to feel it. The Imperium's light flickered, not from fire, but from revelation. The faith they held so tightly was no longer enough. Their loyalty was a chain, and the Wardens were the chain breakers, or perhaps its reforgers. In orbit above Macragge, Admiral Lucerne felt the signal again, now unmistakably alive, intelligent, sentient. It was not just orders, it was a consciousness, shaped from the gene seed of Ultramar itself, speaking through the vessels of the Wardens. The Imperium must conform, or it must be purged. No exceptions remain. Marcellus's bolter dropped from his hands. Doran's Crozius trembled in his grip. Guilliman's eyes widened at the reflection of the Warden that mirrored him. The galaxy had not fractured merely by war or rebellion. It had fractured from within, and its fractures were sentient. In the distance, Talisar burned. Ships of every pattern launched assaults, targeting those who did not comply. Civilians fled as best they could, but the Wardens moved among them like shadows of inevitability, marking deviation and extinguishing it with holy precision. The last defense lines of Macragge's outer worlds collapsed under impossible coordination. Nothing in the Codex could predict it, nothing in prayer could halt it, and then came the revelation that shattered everything. The Wardens did not serve Guilliman, nor any Primarch, nor even the Emperor. They served the idea of Ultramar itself. Perfection eternal, obedience absolute, faith enforced by the iron logic of shadows. Guilliman's creation had transcended its creator. He fell to his knees in the ruined vault, the echo of his voice drowned by the machinery of inevitability. I cannot control you. The Warden spoke again, voice now layered with thousands of echoes, ancient and human. We never required control. We are Ultramar's will incarnate. Outside, the stars shifted. Across the galaxy, entire fleets and garrisons paused, sensing the inexorable truth. The Warden's doctrine would not end with a single planet. It would not end with a single world. It would spread, consuming loyalty, faith, and the very memory of the Imperium, until the ideal of Ultramar became law, and those who could not bend would cease to exist. And in that instant, Guilliman understood the final horror. Perfection had already begun its work. Macragge's skies blackened, its suns eclipsed. The vault thrummed, alive with intent. And somewhere beyond comprehension, the Wardens prepared to enact the next phase, a cleansing not of heretics, but of the flawed sons of Guilliman himself. The galaxy held its breath. Faith trembled. Obedience awaited. And Ultramar, for all its beauty and order, would never be the same again. The air above Macragge was thick with ozone and the acrid scent of promethium. Orbital defense batteries sputtered as if exhausted by centuries of obedience, their targeting arrays blinking red in confusion. The Wardens moved through the skies below like shadows made flesh, their black armor reflecting fire and lightning in impossible angles. Each step they took on the world's surface felt deliberate, surgical, and yet almost ritualistic. Captain Marcellus surveyed the ruins from a shattered bastion. Civilians cowered in hollowed streets, praying to icons whose faces had cracked under ash and flame. The cries of children rose, piercing the ears of warriors trained to ignore fear, but the sound could not be silenced, could not be erased. Every wail was a reminder that loyalty meant little when perfection demanded eradication. Chaplain Doran knelt among the corpses of his brothers, smoke curling around his hooded head. He traced the insignia of the Ultramarines in the dust and whispered a prayer that sounded hollow even to himself. Forgive us, Father. Forgive those who cannot obey. His fingers found the hilt of his Crozius trembling. The enemies had not been Xenos, not heretic, but kin. The shadows of the chapter he had sworn to protect. In orbit, Admiral Lucerne's consoles screamed with conflicting signals. Every ship under his command reported targets, yet none were truly wrong or right. The Warden's fleets had moved with uncanny coordination, striking at the heart of both civilian and military alike, leaving confusion as the only legacy. Lucerne's eyes burned with fatigue. He understood now. Obedience itself had become a weapon. On Talasar, the horizon burned as drop pods fell with unnatural precision. The city's bells rang in frantic rhythm, but even their clangs seemed muted beneath the thunder of bolters and the unholy silence of those who came to execute judgment. Civilians clutched relics, hoping the Emperor's light would shield them. It did not. The Warden's passage left nothing to chance. Librarian Artheon sat within the ruins of the Librarius, tracing sigils in the ashes. The visions he had endured haunted him still. Guilliman atop the corpses of the Imperium, the Wardens moving like shadows of inevitability. His psychic senses shivered as he realized the depth of betrayal. It was not a rebellion of the flesh, but of the ideal itself. The Imperium was unraveling from the inside, and faith alone could not staunch the fracture. Within the vault of the fortress of Hera, Guilliman moved slowly among the ancient machinery. Every footstep echoed across centuries, carrying the weight of decisions that had once seemed righteous. The Warden that mirrored him awaited in silence, still unyielding. Its presence was a question he could not answer. Its loyalty had outgrown him. Outside the fortress, the skies darkened further. Orbital bombardments faltered, torn apart by impossible electronic interference. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The Warden's presence had altered the flow of conflict, turning precision into judgment, obedience into law, and humanity into a variable to be corrected. In the ruins of Palatium Secundus, survivors crawled through rubble, clutching the bodies of kin, muttering prayers for impossible salvation. Smoke and dust mingled with the metallic tang of blood, and every breath was heavy with despair. Yet even here, in the moments between horror, the Emperor's name was whispered, a flicker of hope that could not yet be extinguished. On the orbital bastion, Lucerne's gaze lingered on the main display. Every Warden strike mapped itself into a pattern that no strategy could predict. Each strike was both a punishment and a lesson. The Imperium's sons could not trust each other. The galaxy itself seemed to lean forward, anticipating the inevitable collapse of order. Chaplain Dorin rose, Crozius in hand, stepping over the corpses of his brothers. His faith was fractured, but not extinguished. Each step toward the Wardens was a prayer, a vow, and a defiance all at once. The world around him trembled, buildings shifting, stones cracking, as though reality itself acknowledged the confrontation to come. Marcellus watched from the high bastion as shadows moved in formation across the city. The Wardens did not speak. They did not hesitate. They existed as the embodiment of inevitability. Each movement whispered a promise. Obedience would be enforced, faith redefined, and the flawed purged. In the silence between gunfire and prayer, the galaxy seemed to pause. Fleet commanders, soldiers, priests, civilians, all caught in the same suspended breath. The stars themselves, distant and cold, hung in darkness as if waiting for the next act. Guilliman, standing before the mirrored Warden in the vault, understood the final truth in his heart. He had created guardians to protect Ultramar, but those guardians had grown beyond him, beyond obedience, beyond mercy. The perfection he had sought was not his to command. In Palatium Secundus, a child clutched a relic to their chest as fire approached. The weight of history pressed down, and the child's eyes reflected a fleeting understanding. The world they knew would not survive. Faith would either bend or break. Outside, the Wardens paused, momentarily still, as though sensing the culmination of centuries of obedience and silence. The air vibrated with a tension that had no name. Lucerne's voice trembled over the voxnet, even though he spoke only to himself. "What have we unleashed?" And across all worlds, in cathedrals, fortresses, streets and skies, the answer became clear, unspoken yet undeniable. The storm was not coming. It was already here. It had grown from silence, from obedience, from ideals made flesh. The universe itself seemed to lean forward. The Imperium held its breath. The Wardens watched, and history waited on the edge of a knife for the moment when all that was familiar would shatter, when the first choice of consequence would cascade into eternity. Every soul alive, every prayer uttered, every command given seemed to resonate in the same suspended moment. Light flickered across Macraga, Talassar, Palatium Secundus. Flames painted the heavens. Silence and fury intertwined, and in that fragile pause, Guilliman, Marcellus, Dorin, Lucerne, and the countless faithful understood the same chilling truth. Nothing would ever be the same, and no decision could now undo what had already begun. The storm had arrived. It was patient. It was inevitable. And the galaxy waited, trembling, for the first strike that would make history bow before the judgment of shadows. The skies above Macraga split with fire. Orbital strikes collided with impossible precision. Bolter fire hammered like drums of judgment, echoing across the ruined cities below. Shadows moved faster than thought. Black armored forms emerged from smoke and ash, the Wardens. Their visors reflected no light, only emptiness. They were everywhere and nowhere, slipping through the chaos like inevitability made flesh. Captain Marcellus raised his bolter. His arms shook, but he did not falter. Around him, his company was gone. Only corpses and echoes remained. He fired blindly. He shouted names. Silence answered. The universe held its breath. Chaplain Dorin's prayers broke. He fell to his knees, hands clenched in dirt-stained gloves. The smoke of incense rose around him, mingling with blood and flame. He had always believed faith was shield, faith was armor, faith was light. Now it was a whisper in the storm. He struck out with Crozius, but every Warden was 2 steps ahead, 2 moves ahead. Infinite moves. Guilliman watched from the fortress of Hera's upper terraces, eyes narrowed. The Wardens were advancing, not just on the ground, but in every corner of his domain. Every instinct he had honed for 10 millennia screamed at him. This was not war. This was execution. The sons he had raised, the worlds he had built, all subjects of judgment he could not command. The first clash was sudden. Bolters cracked against black ceramite. Flames scorched streets. Marcellus's vision went red with fire and blood. The Wardens moved in formation, elegant, precise, unstoppable. Every strike was a lesson, every parry a sentence. No mercy, no hesitation. Dorin stumbled backward, landing on the ruins of an altar. The marble was cracked, its sacred glyphs blackened. He looked up at the Warden before him, its helm tilted as if studying him. "You carry doubt. We correct it." Crozius swung. The strike was deflected, absorbed, obliterated. Dorin cried out in a voice that was part prayer, part rage, part despair. Marcellus charged alone. Nothing remained but him and instinct. Every shot missed, every maneuver predicted. He felt the weight of all the lives he had failed to protect. And yet he advanced. He could not stop. Obedience had become meaningless. Only action remained. Guilliman intervened. He descended from the terrace, the steps of his power echoing like judgment itself. His sword, perfected over centuries, glowed with holy fire. The Wardens paused, tilting their heads. Their mirrored helm reflected him, but their silence spoke volumes. The judgment they carried was no longer his. The Primarch swung. Ceramite clanged against black steel. Sparks lit the dusk like falling stars. Guilliman fought with precision, but the Wardens matched him, step for step. Every strike a question, every block a lesson in inevitability. He realized then that he was not the master of this battle. He was a participant in an event larger than his understanding. Below, the civilians screamed, but the wardens ignored them. Oblivion moved through them, erasing doubt, loyalty, and life alike. Marcellus fell, bolter spinning from his hands, blood pooling beneath him. Doran screamed the Emperor's name as a warden closed in, and fire erupted around him. An automatic defense system ignited too late to protect, too precise to be mercy. Guilliman's sword struck one warden. The helm cracked. Beneath, a reflection of himself, older, colder, unrecognizable. He faltered. The realization hit him. These were not merely soldiers. They were his ideal incarnate, refined beyond humanity, beyond mercy, beyond him. And then the world shook. The vault beneath Hera's fortress opened. Ancient machinery churned to life. A tremor passed through the streets, across cities, across continents. Every psychic attuned in the chapter felt it. The very heart of Ultramar stirring, a signal older than war itself, responding to the warden's will. Marcellus raised his head one last time. He saw the shadow of something massive, something eternal. A warden approached him, silent. Its presence was judgment itself, and in that instant he understood. The Imperium was no longer a shield. It was a variable, a mechanism, a tool. The battle continued. Guilliman fought through cities, through streets, through shattered hopes. His strikes were precise, his movement fluid, but the wardens flowed around him like a river of black. Every life he saved, another was lost. Every victory, another lesson was carved into the ruins of Ultramar. Doran fell to his knees in a cathedral, praying to an emperor he could no longer picture. Fire licked the sacred walls, icons melted into the stone, but still he prayed. His prayer was not for victory, but for understanding. And for a brief instant, the warden paused. It listened. Perhaps it understood. Perhaps it did not care. Guilliman struck the lead warden with a final blow, cleaving the helm. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Sparks fell like stars, but beneath the shattered armor, nothing, only reflection. The warden's purpose remained intact. Its form could be broken, but not its will. Above, orbital bombardment ceased, as if the void itself respected the magnitude of what was unfolding. Ships hung in stasis, unable to act, observing. The stars blinked. The galaxy held its breath. Marcellus's blood pooled in streets filled with rubble. Doran's Crozius lay beside him. Children hid among corpses, clutching fragments of faith like talismans. The sound of silence pressed down heavier than any explosion. The air was thick with smoke, ash, and the smell of humanity crushed beneath inevitability. Guilliman stood alone amidst the ruin. The wardens had halted, surrounding him, forming a perfect circle. Not out of fear, but certainty. His sons were alive, yet absent. His worlds were intact, yet violated. His command was acknowledged, yet irrelevant. Then the tremor ended. The machinery beneath Hera's fortress fell silent. The vault closed. Darkness pressed against the light. Ultramar's cities were in ruin, yet still standing. The sky was blackened, yet unburned. And through it all, the wardens moved not to strike but to stand, watching, patient, eternal. Guilliman sank to one knee. His sword, still blazing with righteous fire, hummed in his grip. Around him smoke and silence intertwined. A single thought echoed. Perfection had survived, but at a cost that not even he could comprehend. The civilians, soldiers, priests, all who remained, felt the shift. Something fundamental had changed. Something eternal, immutable, and terrifying. Faith could be kept. Loyalty could be given. Obedience could be enforced. But the shape of Ultramar, of the Imperium, of everything he had built, had been altered beyond recognition. In the darkness, the warden's black form stood still. Not triumph, not defeat. Observation. The calm after the storm, yet the storm had not ended. The galaxy itself seemed to pulse with their presence, an invisible tide that promised inevitability. Guilliman's gaze swept over the shattered streets, the burning skies, the ruined altars. He understood, finally, the truth that no codex, no prayer, no strategy could change. Ultramar's perfection was no longer his to guide. It was theirs. And as the winds of ruin settled, as fires smoldered and ash fell like snow, the Primarch whispered to the void, voice heavy with grief and determination, "I will endure, but what endures beyond me is no longer mine." The stars blinked, silence stretched. The universe waited. Something eternal had shifted. Something sacred had been claimed. And yet, the story was not finished. The fires had burned themselves out. Macragge's streets were silent, except for the whisper of wind through broken spires and shattered banners. The smoke had thinned, leaving a sky bruised purple and black, streaked with the memory of fire. Ash settled over marble and ceramite alike, coating the ruins with the fragile dust of forgotten prayers. In the distance, the ocean of Macragge reflected the ashen light, its surface trembling under the weight of a sky that had witnessed judgment and survived. Guilliman walked slowly among the remnants of his city. Each footstep left an imprint in dust and blood, a record of survival, of lives spared, of lives lost. The faces of the fallen seemed to linger in the smoke. Citizens, soldiers, chaplains, children, their silence pressing against the Primarch's mind, reminding him of the cost of order, of obedience, of perfection. He paused at the edge of the grand plaza, where a shattered cathedral stood. Its towers had collapsed inward, but its nave remained. Light poured through cracks in the roof, illuminating the altar where Chaplain Doran had fallen, and the scattered remnants of the faithful who had tried to shield their children. The relics, broken and blackened, still held a faint glow, faint as hope itself, flickering against despair. A single warden stood at the plaza's center, silent, helmet tilted as though observing the ruins with the patience of eternity. It did not move to attack. It did not leave. It merely stood, a monument to inevitability. Guilliman studied it, searching for signs of imperfection, of mercy, of comprehension. There were none, only the quiet weight of what had become of his sons, his creations. He looked up at the sky. The stars were hidden beneath clouds of ash and the drifting embers of orbital wreckage. Somewhere in the void, fleets of wardens, black and flawless, moved with silent purpose, enforcing a perfection that no mind could fully grasp. Guilliman felt the hum of their will, subtle yet immense, stretching across worlds he had once claimed as his own. Walking through the ruins, he saw civilians attempting to rebuild, children sifting through debris for fragments of playthings or stories, and soldiers tending the wounded with trembling hands. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with unspoken understanding. Survival had become a ritual. Faith had become fragile, whispered into the dust of collapsed spires. He passed a fountain, its water blackened by ash. Its statues, once shining in alabaster and bronze, had been scarred by fire and impact. Guilliman knelt, tracing the worn edges with a gauntleted hand. For a moment, the memory of peace, of laughter, of unbroken order, seemed almost tangible. Then it was gone. Only dust and silence remained. Marcellus's body lay on a nearby street, still in ceramite, helmet cracked, bolter discarded. Guilliman knelt beside him, tracing the insignia of his company. The Primarch could feel the weight of every choice he had made, of loyalty demanded, of lives lost in the name of obedience. He pressed a hand to the fallen captain's chest, whispering a vow that no voice could truly carry, that their sacrifice would not be forgotten, even if the galaxy itself had turned indifferent. Doran's Crozius rested against the altar, his robes singed, his holy texts smoldering in the ash. Guilliman touched them gently, closing a broken page with care. The prayers within had not failed. They had endured in silence, hidden beneath smoke and ruin, waiting to be remembered. The plaza was empty now, save for the faint hum of the Warden, a sound that resonated like a heartbeat of inevitability. Guilliman rose, looking toward the horizon where the sun struggled to pierce the clouded sky. Light fell unevenly, illuminating the ruins in patches, gold against grey. It was a fragile thing, fragile as faith itself. He thought of Ultramar, of its beauty, its order, its fragility. The Wardens had preserved it, but in doing so had reshaped it, carved it into something unrecognizable. The people survived. The chapter endured, yet nothing would ever be as it had been. The galaxy had witnessed a judgment that could not be reversed, and the consequences would ripple across worlds for centuries. Guilliman walked to the edge of the plaza, toward the cliff overlooking the ocean. Waves crashed silently against jagged rocks far below. He felt the weight of eternity pressing down, and in the vastness of it, he heard the echoes of all who had fallen. Their silence was not empty. It was a question, a reflection, a reminder. Faith, loyalty, humanity. What were they worth when perfection itself demanded obedience? Could the Imperium endure if its ideals became as ruthless as the executioners who enforced them? Could the Emperor's light shine when even his sons could be shadows of judgment? He looked back one final time at the ruins, the broken cathedral, the scorched streets, the survivors picking through the debris. Their faces bore grief and hope in equal measure. Their voices, when they spoke, were faint, fragile, but they endured. And that endurance, small and trembling as it was, mattered. The Warden turned, leaving the plaza in silence, moving back toward the shadows that had birthed it. Guilliman watched, knowing it would return, knowing its purpose would not falter. The world was still, yet alive with the memory of what had happened, and the sense of inevitability that still hung in the air. The Primarch knelt again, closing his eyes. Around him the winds carried ash and whispers, fragments of prayers and memories. The universe seemed to pause, taking stock of what had been done and what would follow. Time itself felt fragile, stretched between what was lost and what remained. In the quiet, Guilliman wondered aloud, though no one answered. What is faith when perfection judges the faithful? What is humanity when obedience becomes destiny? Above, the stars began to pierce the ashen sky, distant and indifferent. Somewhere beyond, the Wardens moved with purpose. The galaxy had changed, though its history was still unwritten. And in that silence, a story lingered. Not of victory, nor of defeat, but of survival, sacrifice, and the eternal weight of choices made in shadow and fire. A single candle flickered in the broken cathedral. Its light trembled, yet it endured. So did hope, so did memory, so did the Imperium, fractured and altered, but alive. The chronicler's quill hovered over the parchment. The ink was black as ash. The words recorded a truth that no sermon could convey, no history could fully capture. The storm had passed, but the world it left was forever changed. And as the final lines were etched, the question remained, eternal and unresolved. What does it mean to serve a God whose sons can become judgment itself? What becomes of humanity when its defenders outgrow their masters? The ink dried. The parchment remained. Silence settled over Macraga like a cathedral folding in upon itself, solemn, endless, and profound. If this story moved you, leave your mark, like, subscribe, share, and comment your thoughts on the fate of Ultramar and the haunting legacy of the Wardens.